Hi and welcome back to a new video. A few days ago we had a discussion going on my Discord channel about the most expensive Z790 board that you can currently buy. And to my surprise, it's not made by ASUS, because typically you would expect them to have overpriced motherboards, but I had to find out that it's from AORUS, aka Gigabyte. It's the Z790 Xtreme X. I paid 1,320 euro for the board itself alone. So that's already quite a lot if you think about that. In theory, for that amount of money, you could buy a Z790 board plus 4900K plus a memory kit. Then, yeah, that's going to be interesting. Hetzner is my long-term partner, which I use to host my own website and also HWBot. With hundreds of thousands of servers in operation, Hetzner is a leading hosting provider and data center operator with their own data centers in Nuremberg and Falkenstein in Germany and also Helsinki in Finland. Besides their high-performance dedicated servers, with great support, they also offer powerful cloud servers at a great price. Their CCX line offers cloud servers with dedicated vCPU that can stand up to any project at the best price-performance ratio on the market. Check out the link in the description below to find out more about Hetzner's CCX cloud servers. So here we have the board, and one thing I want to point out, it's the same as when we tested the Z690 Godlike from MSI. If you have a board which is basically the most expensive you can buy, then I will also judge it from a different standard than like judging a, let's say, 300 or 400 euro motherboard, because with this kind of price tag, at least I personally would expect perfection, and I think you would probably do the same. So that's why I will take things a little bit more serious than what I would usually judge when it's like a cheaper board. Let's quickly talk about the accessories that are included. And I have to say I'm kind of surprised how little you have included considering the price of this board for nowadays boards. So we have a USB DAC, which is basically a USB audio sound card, whatever, but I have no clue about audio stuff at all, so I cannot judge if this is a good thing or not. Apart from that, we have a Wi-Fi antenna and a ton of adapter cables like this one, which is basically essential. It's like the board connector to just normal fan connectors, because the board doesn't have the normal fan connectors, so those are kind of mandatory. It's not really an accessory, it's something you just really need. Same goes for those RGB cables and like the onboard header, and then you have USB headers and the SATA cable, and then you have a heatsink for M.2. That's it. That's everything that's included. And then there is the manual, which is surprisingly little. They claim they want to reduce the used amount of paper, and that's why they have this like short start guide that contains a lot of QR codes, so you get to the latest version of the manual. I think it's a good thing to do so, but then on the other hand, I mean, you have so much plastic and plastic packagings inside. If you would really care about the environment so much, you would maybe start with getting rid of those plastic packagings instead of trying to save a few pages of paper. So here we have it, the AORUS Z790 Xtreme X. It's extremely wide, that's the first thing I notice. It's quite a big board. Probably not server standard, but I guess they also call it eATX. So it's definitely wider to the right, which means that you will have to check if this board will fit into your case. Certainly if you have a small case, could be compatibility issues, so make sure you check that up front. As you can see, all of those like protective films are still on the board. I still have to peel them off. First thing that you will also notice that this is a 4-DIMM board, which is certainly going to be interesting, especially considering what kind of memory compatibility AORUS or Gigabyte is officially stating. And that's why I decided to also order this 8000 C38 32GB kit from G.Skill, which is also quite expensive. I think like 260, 270 euro, but it's officially listed in the QVL list of this motherboard. So at least in theory, it should work, right? By the way, why is there Lucky from MSI on the M2 heatsink? Now with all the protective films gone, we can look at the beauty of this board. I mean, that obviously depends on the personal preference, but if you like all those like shiny surfaces and ultra clean look with everything covered, then this might be a board for you. I'm personally more a friend of like aluminum surfaces because they're not as sensitive when it comes to like scratching. Because on here, even though I already peeled off the protective films, I would usually recommend not to do so until you're fully done with the build. Because I think this surface, even if you just like slightly scratch it with your, let's say, PCIe power cable, for example, during assembly, then you will straight have scratches in the surface. It's probably even more problematic on the region up here, which is basically a huge LCD, and the LCD sits on top of a big heatsink. I'm not sure how much this is going to affect or impact the cooling capability of the board, but if you just look at the surface area of the heatsink, I think this could be pretty nice. Then there is also this thing on top, which is an additional, I would say, cable hider thing. So it's just a piece of plastic, feels a bit cheap, but I think it's a good thing to have, especially if you're done with the cable management, like you have your CPU fans attached, like the EPS cables. You can add this on here, just add it with magnets, and then it also hides the cabling on top. So that's just a nice little extra, because I think the entire like design speech of this board is that you cannot really see anything. Like everything is hidden underneath some sort of like heatsink or cover. And this kind of design language is also what you can find on the bottom of the board, because typically I would say on a traditional motherboard, then you would still have a lot of connectors like USB and all of that on the bottom. And that's why we can find all those connectors on the right. And that's also why you need those adapters that I showed earlier that are included with the board. And this also just depends purely on personal preference and also on the case which you're going to use. Because those angled connectors, like 90 degree, and already keeping in mind that the board is a little bit extended towards this direction, it might make compatibility more of a problem. But then on the other hand, if you have enough space, then for example the 24-pin connector will make your cable management much better, because you don't need a 180 degree band and only a 90 degree band. So in the end, it just depends on the case you're going to use if this is going to be better or worse. Just make sure that you check that up front. For the PCIe slots, we have the top one with some kind of like a quick release, something like that. So that's quite convenient, quite nice. I like those features. And then on the bottom one, you don't have it, which means, I mean, this is pretty much hidden in here. If you ever have to release a card on here, because I just tried it, I just plugged the graphics card and tried to release it like behind here, that is really difficult. Like accessing this thing from the back and releasing the card, that's going to be a problem. So if you have a card that has like an extended backplate, good luck getting it back out. So I will equip it with the 8000 megatransfers sticks and also our 14900K. Since we're running a Gen 5 SSD in there and we also have this big heatsink included, might as well also use it. Before we continue with anything else, we will first update the BIOS, because you can see on the top left, the version the board came with was F2, which is quite old, and I'm going to update this to the most recent version. What about Gigabyte's control center? I haven't used it for several months, so let's see if they improved it or how it works today. Well, good start. So if I'm new to this and I want to start a tutorial, where do I click? Nothing works, I can only skip. Great. Okay, so yeah, I have to press the question mark after pressing skip. That doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think there's a tutorial, but like the navigation just doesn't make sense. Okay, back to the main screen. So if we want to start a tutorial here, yeah, it actually works. So we have the navigation bar on the left. Then there is like homepage, different buttons, and then tutorial homepage, product. I think there's an R too much. Okay, but technically there is a tutorial. You just first have to skip the tutorial to get to the tutorial. Doesn't make a lot of sense. So let's just try whatever they advise us, press check, and then install whatever they want me to install. Oh wait, no, Norton, nein, ja, nein. Ach du Scheiße. Okay, so before you press start, make sure that you uncheck like Norton. Why is this automatically selected? I hate stuff like that. I have bad feelings, once again, about Gigabyte Control Center. So I just went to RGB Fusion. I did a restart after installing everything. Where is the display? Like, already this is extremely confusing. So those are RGB strips from what I understand correctly. This is also like, the placing of this is all maximum confusing. Because it, like, this could be the location of my memory sticks, like the G-Skill sticks. This is probably the chipset thing down there. Where is the screen? Why is everything on here missing? I don't get it. So I just installed the Gigabyte Performance library, but that seemed... Oh, where is this coming from now? I will just, because I have no clue what this is. I mean, I cannot imagine that I will need the smart backup feature to get the display to work. Not sure what this is, but I will just install all of this now and see if it helps. As you can see, everything apart from Norton is installed. If we go back here, this is still, something is off here. And I still cannot click on anything when it comes to the display. Also, I didn't find anything display related in any of the other like submenus. So yeah, not sure. Also not sure why this is like partially German, partially English. This is also pretty obscure. Like if I go to settings, everything is English. Like fan control, everything is English. And then I go to like, I don't know, fan control here. And then you have like random German translations, and like the Gen 5 NVMe drive sits in idle at about 45 degrees Celsius, which is a great temperature because I know from experience without heatsink it would throttle down in Windows even in idle. That's the kind of temperature that you would probably see or expect during gaming, something between 50 and 60 degrees Celsius depending on the airflow of your system and also the placement of your graphics card. The biggest problem though we can see in GPU-Z with our RTX 4090 only running with X8 PCI Express lanes. After removing the bottom cover, we can see even more M.2 slots, and actually this one would make more sense for a normal user because this slot is also directly connected to the CPU, but it's not connected over PCIe Gen 5, which means that it's not going to steal any kind of PCI Express lanes because it's natively connected to the CPU, whereas this slot is basically sharing the Gen 5 lanes with the top PCIe slot right here. All the other slots are directly connected to the chipset and may also be used. That's always a problem with Gen 5 drives on Z790 because most of the boards just use the top slot for the Gen 5 drives, which then shares lanes with the GPU, which is something you usually want to avoid because I would say most of the people are gaming with those rigs. So you cannot have both, like top speed for the drive and top speed for the GPU. At the same time, you also cannot have the best cooling because even if you would say, okay, I will just stick to a Gen 4 drive and put it in the slot right here that's connected to the CPU, you would be limited by the cooling of this. And you can imagine if you apply 4 Gen 4 NVMe drives in here, this is also going to be quite warm, especially under load. So the best solution would be to take this slot right here, this piece, and move it to that side. This way you could decide if you want to use the Gen 4 from this side and have it natively connected to the CPU or use Gen 5. You just have to flip around the SSD. But in either way, you could make use of the big heatsink for best cooling of your SSD. The downside though would be that you would lose one NVMe slot, but I think that should be fine, just having 4 in total. And just a quick look at the connectivity in the I/O shield. We have the ignition button, which is usually to power up the board without powering up the CPU. So for example, if you want to fill up your custom water cooling loop, that's quite useful. Q-Flash Plus button, so you can update the BIOS without actually running the board. Then Wi-Fi 7, that's probably the most advertised feature when it comes to the like Z790 refresh boards. We have 10 times USB 3.2 Type A and also dual Type C, aka those are Thunderbolt 4 ports, also 2.5G network and 10G network. There are also those holes in the I/O shield, which according to the Gigabyte marketing material that you can find online, this should be able to reduce your VRM temperature by 7 degrees Celsius. Not sure how that's going to be possible. We will try to figure that out. For that, I want to take a closer look at the cooling and the heatsink solution underneath, which means that we will have to remove the backplate. The backplate on the backside is nicely made with those edges, definitely gives the board extra stability and probably also a bit of cooling. That's something I really like. I removed the I/O panel with the display inside. First of all, that's a nice piece of tech, so really good looking. But then, I mean, let's take a look at those like tiny holes again. You can see, like 5 shining through here. And then if I turn it around, it's a little bit difficult to do with one hand, but you can also see 4 in that direction. The rest you cannot see because the rest of the holes, basically the entire top row, is covered by the plastic of the display. Not sure how this is going to help you decrease the temperature by 7 degrees Celsius, but let's see. Now let's get back to the positive side of things, which is definitely the heatsink and also the PCB quality overall. That's something I have to highlight with Gigabyte boards. Not sure how they do it, but if you look at the PCB and the way it looks and feels, it always has this like very high quality touch to it that I really like about the Gigabyte boards. And also this heatsink, it has so much surface area, I don't think you will ever have any kind of issues with it. The only downside is probably that the majority of the top fins is going to be covered by the screen. Not sure how much this is going to impact the temperatures. Something maybe we want to find out. But apart from that, probably if you have a little bit of airflow in the system, that should be really good. What a massive and also beautiful heatsink. Can see it's forming contact with the inductors and also the power stages. However, you can already see a little bit that the imprint is a little bit uneven, so it's probably not making the same kind of contact to all of them. Now look at this beautiful array of power supply. It's basically 24 phases for CPU vCore, whereas always 2 are active at the same time. So basically 12 phases that are double populated. So always 2 power stages, 2 inductors, 2 like capacitors are active at the same time. But it's just overkill. This is going to be perfect for any kind of scenario with those 105 amp stages, even like XOC, no problem whatsoever. Now, one thing you could maybe talk about a little bit is that those 2 power stages in the center don't have perfect or maybe no contact at all to the thermal pads in the center. And also let's pay attention to the entire left row and the top one. The top power stage does not make contact with the thermal pad at all. Same goes for the top row. The power stages, the total left one, also does not make contact with the thermal pads. The 2 power stages in the corner right here, they don't make contact with the cooler because the cooler is simply too short, at least in the corner right here. So it would have to extend another like 5 millimeters here and here to form contact with those power stages. And then, I mean, it's a 1,300 euro board, so you could argue that you expect perfection. That is up to you to judge. From my point of view, just the technical observation, I don't think that's a problem because the majority or like 100% of the heat can easily dissipate it from those power stages through the PCB. That's no problem whatsoever. As long as the PCB is cold enough, it can easily cool the entire power stage. So if one power stage doesn't make contact, then the heat can be dissipated through the neighbor contact, basically. And I don't see that's a problem, but that's up to you to decide. We quickly have to talk about the memory topic again though. We just have to keep in mind that this is a 4-DIMM board. And there's also an interesting video from Bullseye about this recently that you might want to check out, where he's rambling about this entire topic. Because on the QVL list of this board, you can find up to 8,266. The highest retail kits I could find in Germany available were 8,000. And it was already quite expensive. But that's on the QVL list of this board, and yeah, that should be interesting to see if this kind of memory speed actually works on a 4-DIMM board. But I also have to say that at least subjectively, it seems like the 14th gen IMCs have been improved a little bit over the 12th and 13th gen. So maybe it works out better on these boards. But it doesn't necessarily mean only because the memory is on the QVL list that it also always works out for you, because keep in mind, if you have a CPU with a bad IMC, it might not boot. Let's check what the board is going to do with the 8000 megahertz on the memory. How nice is that? And it also didn't take like, I don't know, like 3 cycles or whatever. It was just like I applied, waited 20 seconds, and we have the 8000 megatransfers. Amazing. Yep, I'm really impressed by this board, how well and smooth it could handle those very high memory frequencies. That was absolutely amazing. I also want to highlight that I tested this with the stock Intel ILM because I didn't want to put any kind of disadvantage on Gigabyte if it wouldn't work. Let's say with a contact frame, that's something I still want to test in addition. So I'm going to put this on for better CPU thermals and then check again if it still runs the 8000. This is also the updated version of the Thermal Grizzly frame, the 13th and 14th gen. Much easier to install. You can just use this key and just tighten with the shorter side for, I would say, a normal mounting pressure. And I also used the stock screws. There are also longer ones included if you need them, because some boards have different like PCB thickness and different backplate thickness, so you might need longer ones. But if you can use the stock ones, just use the stock ones. This board, when it comes to memory, is a lot of fun. It's absolutely amazing. Again, 8000 boots so quick and all the way through. And again, as you can see here in Windows. You can see that the 14900K is staying below the defined power limits. PL1 is 280, PL2 is 4095. Still, the CPU consumes only 220, which is causing it to have a very good temperature, below 70 degrees Celsius. And that's probably because Gigabyte is following the Intel specs, at least when it comes to the current. Not sure about the power because that would be lower, like 253 if I remember correctly. But it seems like the ICC max is defined correctly. That's why the CPU is staying quite a lot colder, consumes less power, and yeah, has good efficiency, or at least better efficiency. Okay. Yeah, that's memory unstable. Interesting. So even though it all booted fine, seems like it's not stable under load. Currently, I'm stability testing with a Cinebench R23. I already finished one run of 30 minutes. I'm in the second half of the second test, so it's about 45 minutes of constant high load. I lowered the memory clock, as you can see, to 7800. So far, no problems at all. This is running pretty stable. The only thing that's a little bit odd is that in between, I'm not quite sure why, at a certain point it stopped reporting temperatures and some clocks. You can see that the VR is just reading 0 degrees Celsius. It was at a max of 60 degrees Celsius. So I'm not quite sure what bugged out here. At least if we take a look at our monitoring display on the motherboard, we can see that it reads out correctly, because you can see a VRM temperature currently of 61 degrees Celsius, and that should be pretty much in line. I have to say this is also kind of an expected problem. And I also want to highlight that I put back the Intel ILM to double check. I can easily boot 8000, but whenever I run Cinebench like 3-4 times, it would start crashing. So there's some kind of memory instability. And if you're a customer buying exactly this, then you are left with a problem where it's pretty hard to identify what actually causes this. First assumption might be that the memory kit is unstable, which, just from personal experience, at least with those G-Skill sticks, is quite unlikely. Then it might be the IMC of the CPU, which is likely because Intel lists a max of 5600 for the CPU and we are trying to run 8000. So that's quite away from spec. And then they also list that it's running up to 8266. That is quite enthusiastic for a 4-DIMM motherboard. And that's why I would personally advise first check what you're looking for. If you're looking for very high memory speed, then just get a 2-DIMM board, like the Tachyon from Gigabyte. I'm pretty sure it will handle high memory speeds much better than this one. Or just get the Apex, one of those boards that have 2 DIMMs. Those run much better. And I also want to point out that this problem is not Gigabyte or like ASUS or MSI exclusive. All of the vendors suffer from this because you have tolerances in everything. In the board manufacturing process, the PCB, then of the CPU, of the memory sticks. I mean, if they're properly bent, the memory is probably not the issue, but you never know what kind of IMC quality you have on your CPU. And that's why if you get a 4-DIMM board like this, it's probably just much better to get a lower memory speed, like 7200, maybe up to 7600 could work on the 14th gen. But if you want to avoid trouble, just get lower memory speed. It will work just fine, it will work a lot better, and you're also going to save a lot of trouble and money. Because typically, if you invest in a kit like this with 8000, you pay a ton of extra for a very little extra of performance. There is this recent video from Bullseye where he's explaining all this much more in detail, also talking about different boards. There you can get some additional info about this entire topic if you're looking for it. I just wish they would, like all the board vendors, would be more transparent when it comes to advertising those very high memory speeds, because I think it's very quick to be very disappointing for the customer. Imagine if you bought an 8266 kit for this board and you just have no way of getting it to run. You're becoming very frustrated. I'm not sure what you're going to return first, maybe memory kit, maybe CPU, maybe motherboard, and then you have a disappointed customer who might not even know what the cause of this is. Because you're advertising up to 8066 and you're already stating like in a small disclaimer that there might be some differences, but you're not even telling the customer what this difference might be. Like, is it the IMC quality of the CPU and how to even identify that? That's just, yeah. It's always a problem with those high memory speeds. With the help of Makita, I'm currently building this small air tunnel thing because I'm currently testing the VRM of the board for 30 minutes to see what kind of max temp it will reach. And then I'm planning to add this small thing to the I/O shield to basically pull air through and see if this then in some way allows to lower the temperature. After about 23 minutes of Cinebench R23 load, the VRM temperature didn't change anymore, and it hasn't been changing for like 5 minutes, so I guess it reached the max. We see that the CPU is constantly pulling just below 280 watt because I unlocked the power limits in BIOS, which also explains why the CPU is constantly running into the thermal limit. But the VRM temperature is absolutely beautiful. I mean, look at this, sitting at 73 degrees Celsius with zero airflow. That's perfect. So I have my air tunnel attached to the board and I'm going to repeat my test. Again, I tested just above 20 minutes under full load. You can see it's the same scenario, same kind of load that is applied to the CPU. And we see, 2 to 3 degrees Celsius lower temperature. So those 2 to 3 degrees Celsius lower temperature could maybe be explained by those holes, or maybe because my air tunnel is not perfectly sealed off and it's pulling a little bit of air here and there and also underneath the board, which certainly helps the temperature. So yeah, I would love to see how you can kind of justify and test 7 degrees Celsius lower temperature through those few tiny holes inside the I/O shield. Pretty sure that's not the case. I would think that it's more a case of marketing bullshit instead of actually helping anything to the temperature. Let's get to the conclusion of the Z790 AORUS Xtreme X, which is going to take quite a bit, I guess, but I will try to keep it as short as possible. Let's start with the overall build quality of the board, which I think is amazing. It feels really nice, high quality, everything is covered, looks brilliant, also has Wi-Fi 7, which is what comes with, I would say, the refresh Z790 boards. I want to highlight that I like that Gigabyte is running the right default settings for the 4900K. So that's nice because you're not running into 350 or 400 watt power draw, what you have on some of the other boards. So it's correctly configured. And if you want to, you can unleash the 4900K, unlock it so you can pull whatever you want if your cooling allows it. But at least stock, it's following the correct Intel guidelines. Now let's get over to the price, because I paid 1,320 euro for this board. And after testing the board, I still didn't figure out why. What are you actually paying for? Because if you compare it to the AORUS Master X, there's not a big difference. The AORUS Master X obviously is not nicely covered in all of the details, but still, just technically speaking, it covers most of what this board covers for less than half the price. The AORUS Master X, it also has 10G network, it also has Wi-Fi 7. In addition, it also has a display port. So the AORUS Master X is probably even better if you ever have to debug the board and you want to run the iGPU of your 4900K, then it's something you can do. Whereas on the Xtreme X, you don't even have a connection for DisplayPort or HDMI, so I don't know. And then the Master X, it doesn't have the LCD, and it has 4 less phases on the CPU power supply, but I mean, that's still going to be fully sufficient, so I don't know. I still don't know why you're paying this much for this board. Let's talk about QVL, the entire memory thing. Generally speaking, Gigabyte is overpromising and under-delivering, which is something that you can also expect from other mainboard vendors because they all run the same policy. They all try to max out their memory advertising speed, and then it could be exactly what we experienced. You buy a very high-end memory kit, maybe 8,000 or 8,200, and then you try to get it to run and it doesn't work, which will lead to disappointment. And I mean, if you spend 1,300 euro, do you want to experience disappointment? Probably not. Wouldn't it be much nicer to just advertise 7,600 and then surprise your customer if it works out that on some boards you can maybe run 8,000, and if it doesn't work out, it's not too bad. But this way, it's just not nice. And I also want to highlight again, this is not just a problem for Gigabyte, but also the other mainboard vendors. You can have the same there if they advertise high memory speeds. Let's start with some marketing bullshit points. First of all, the holes in the I/O shield. Not sure how Gigabyte wants to lower the temperature by 7 degrees Celsius with those tiny holes in there where half of them are blocked. Doesn't make any kind of sense. I mean, we kind of had the best case scenario where you have no airflow here at all, and then we use a fan to pull out air, and even then we lower it by 2 degrees Celsius, which could be by just a bit of air passing around here and on the top and maybe on the bottom. So yeah, 7 degrees Celsius, never gonna happen. Then they are advertising nano coating on the fins, which according to Gigabyte is lowering the temperature by 10%. If you use temperature and percent, I'm already gonna go wild because that's something you just don't do. What? Fahrenheit, Celsius, Kelvin, like what's the reference? And then, yeah, like just never do percent in temperature. That's something that should be forbidden. Then they also claim that the cooler has 10 times more surface area, but like more than what? Like no cooler, like the previous cooler, there is no reference. So that also just, it's not helpful whatsoever. Now let's talk about the main feature of this board, which is probably the LCD, because apart from that, it's not that much different to the AORUS Master X. And then the screen leads to a lot of disappointment. Generally speaking, the screen is nice because you get all those visuals of like CPU temperature, VRM temperature, and then, for example, fan speed. But like in my case, if you would use the Corsair environment, for example, it's very unlikely that you're going to populate all the fan headers. And then it's like 3 times cycling through all the fan headers that display 0 RPM. Like system fan 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then like pump speed and everything shows 0 RPM. So it's a lot of wasted potential. And then you think, okay, let's maybe install the Gigabyte software and fix this, but you cannot select anything. You cannot modify the screen whatsoever, which is so much wasted potential, it's unbelievable. For the price of 1,300 euro, and I couldn't even adjust the color. Imagine buying this and you want to have like a black and red themed PC and you cannot even fix the color. What is this? Like for the price, it's a complete joke. And that's just because of the software. Every single time I use the software, I'm hugely disappointed. I think last time I used the Gigabyte software was with like 4080 and 4090 cards where they had LCDs and they had like RGB features. None of them were working. It's the same again here. And then like the software is bloated with a lot of additional features that you're probably not going to use. You don't even know what they're supposed to do. You install everything and it still doesn't work. Yeah, that's just, it's unbelievable, really. And if I would be a normal customer buying this board, honestly speaking, I would return it. Like, if you cannot even adjust this, which is probably the main selling point of the board, what's the point of buying it? Just get the AORUS Master X instead and you will be much happier because there's probably not so much software that can disappoint you. You might want to use some RGB headers, but they might work. Apart from that, yeah. Probably, if you want to buy a Gigabyte product, as long as you don't have to use their software, it's fine, but this way, yeah, disappointing. Pretty disappointing. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time. Bye-bye.